Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, it's all about construction projects.
Oh, construction projects, they're fascinating.
They are, and we've all got that stack of documents, right? Feasibility studies,
The
contracts.
whole shebang.
Exactly. And it can feel overwhelming, but
It's essential, though, isn't it?
absolutely. And that's why we're doing this deep dive. We're going to break it all down, help you understand those key
So
stages.
in that very first, is this even possible to hopefully a smooth handover?
Exactly. No lawsuits, ideally.
Ideally.
So we're aiming to give you that confidence to tackle a project like a pro.
And you know what always gets me about construction? It's how many different fields it brings
Oh,
together.
absolutely.
It's so much more than just bricks and mortar.
Right.
You've got economics in there, design, legal aspects, even a bit of environmental science sometimes.
The whole ecosystem.
Exactly, a whole ecosystem. And today, we're giving you that 360-degree view of how a project goes from an idea to a finished, well, whatever you're building.
To reality. So let's start with the foundation, shall we? The feasibility study.
Ah, the feasibility study.
And it's more than just a formality.
Oh, absolutely not.
This is where you separate those, like, pie-in-the-sky ideas
Yeah.
from the ones with real potential.
The solid gold opportunities.
Exactly. And I bet you've got an example up your sleeve.
I always do. Remember that time you're eyeing that old warehouse district?
Yo, yeah.
Thinking about those trendy loft conversions, all that exposed brick?
Yeah, that sounds amazing, right? But
But here's where the feasibility study really comes in. Zoning laws, heritage overlays, they can completely change the game.
oh, for sure. You can't just assume you can do whatever you want with a building, can you?
Nope. It's like that old saying, location, location, location. But in this case, it's more like regulations, regulations, regulations.
Because those regulations can make or break your project before you even start sketching, right?
Absolutely. And a good feasibility study, it's like having X-ray vision into your project's future.
Ooh, I like that.
You're looking for those hidden costs, things that might pop up later and throw your budget off.
The gotchas, right. Like, what if that warehouse has asbestos that needs removing?
Exactly. Or maybe the soil conditions need more work than you thought. And then there's the big question. Will this project actually make money?
That's the bottom line.
Right, it is. And that's where those financial terms come in net present value due diligence.
They sound intimidating, don't they?
They do. But they're your financial safeguards, like net present value that helps you see past the initial costs.
A long game.
Exactly. It's about understanding a project's long-term profitability, like having a financial time machine.
Okay, I'm picturing a financial DeLorean now.
Right.
But you're right, that long-term view is crucial. And you know what else is key at that stage?
What's that?
Market sounding.
Ah, market sounding. It's all about validating your assumptions, isn't it?
It is. So you might think loft apartments are super trendy. Everyone wants one.
Yeah.
But then you do your market sounding and realize there's actually a bigger demand for small business spaces in that area.
That's a game changer right there.
Exactly. So feasibility study. Check. The numbers make sense. We've got a good feeling about this. Now we can get to the fun part, right?
Now we get creative.
Designing.
Yes. This is where vision starts to become reality, at least on paper for now.
Blueprint time.
Uh,
But it starts even before that, right?
it does. It starts with the project brief.
The project brief.
The blueprint for your blueprint, I like to call it, it outlines everything.
Yeah.
The look you're going for, the technical details, everything.
And I learned that there's a really important distinction in those details. Prescriptive versus performance requirements.
Ah, yes. Good point.
And I'll admit, it's sounded a bit technical at first, but
Oh, it's a crucial difference.
it is, right. And understanding it can save you so many headaches down the line.
Oh, so many headaches. It's like this. A prescriptive requirement is saying you have to use this specific type of insulation, no exceptions.
Okay, very specific.
Very. But a performance requirement, it's more like saying the building needs to achieve this level of energy efficiency. How you get there is up to you.
So it's about setting the goal, but not dictating every tiny detail.
Not exactly. One is about solutions, the other is about goals and being flexible. Because in construction, things change, you have to adapt.
It's problem solving, basically.
Big time. And speaking of problem solvers, you'll want a good team around you during this design phase.
Oh, absolutely.
Land surveyors, for example. Those are essential.
To make sure you're actually building on the right piece of land.
Exactly. And then you've got your arborists,
Arborists.
trees. You'd be amazed how often those come into play. Then there's geotechnical engineers.
They make sure the ground can actually support what you're building, right?
Exactly. And if you're working on a building with a bit of history, you might even need a heritage consultant.
It's a whole team of specialists.
It is. And each one brings something crucial to the table.
It's like putting together a puzzle, really.
It is. And once you've got your team, you'll start seeing those preliminary drawings.
Ah, the first glimpse of your vision coming to life. And of course, those all-important cost estimates, too.
Can't forget those. They're not set in stone at this point, but they give you a good starting point.
It's like a sneak peek behind the curtain. And I bet this is where you really encourage people to ask questions, right?
Oh, absolutely. The more you understand at this stage, the fewer surprises you'll have later.
Knowledge is power.
Always. So, drawings are good. Budget's looking okay. Everyone's happy. What's next?
Time for everyone's favorite part, right?
Yeah.
Getting those permits.
The permits. The bane of every construction project, some might say.
The permit minefield.
Exactly. But it's a necessary one, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. But from what I've gathered, it's not just about ticking boxes. It's about really understanding the why behind those regulations.
You've got it. It's about being able to justify your plans and show that you've considered all the angles.
And being prepared to answer some tough questions, I imagine.
Oh, definitely.
So how does one even begin to navigate this maze?
Well, a good first step is that pre-application meeting with the council.
Okay.
Think of it as a chance to get everyone on the same page right from the start.
Open communication.
Exactly. And yes, you'll likely need to address any concerns from neighbors too.
Because they can sometimes throw a wrench in the works, can't they?
They can. But remember, it's all about finding solutions that work for everyone.
Diplomacy.
Exactly. Now, even with the best intentions, sometimes those approvals hit a snag.
Ah, yes, the dreaded roadblock.
And if things can't be resolved at the council level, that's where VCAT comes in.
VCAT. Now, that name gets thrown around a lot, but for those who don't know, what exactly is it?
VCAT is the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. Think of it as a kind of referee for planning disputes.
Okay.
They listen to both sides and make a decision based on the evidence presented.
So it's a big deal if your project ends up there.
It can be, yes. That's why that groundwork you do in the feasibility study is so important.
Because if you've already identified potential roadblocks.
Exactly. Being prepared is half the battle. And speaking of battles, any delays in getting those permits.
Uh-oh, delays mean.
They can push back your timeline. Which brings us to the moment we've all been waiting for.
Drum roll, please. The actual construction phase.
Hard hats on, everyone.
Time to get this show on the road.
Time to see those plans become reality. Now, where were we? Yes, we were just about to set foot on that construction site.
Hard hats on, of course.
Safety first. And, it might feel like the hard part's over once those excavators start digging.
Like we can finally relax a little.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But honestly, vigilance is still key during this whole construction phase.
So it's not all just time-lapse videos of buildings going up smoothly.
Those are fun to watch, though, aren't they?
Yeah.
But yeah, behind the scenes, lots of monitoring going on. Take those daily site conditions, for instance.
Those sound kind of basic. What's so important about those?
They might seem mundane, but they're actually crucial. For tracking progress, for one, and for spotting potential hiccups early on.
It's all about staying ahead of the game.
Precisely. And it's not just about what's happening on the ground that day either. Our sources mentioned those detailed drawings registers.
Drawings registers. Okay, remind me what those are all about again.
Version control. Super important. Imagine building a house from outdated blueprints. Not good, right?
Recipe for disaster.
Totally. So those registers, they keep track of every little change to the design, make sure everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet.
Like using track changes, but for an entire building. That makes sense. And speaking of changes, we have to talk about variations.
Variations. Every project has them.
I get the feeling that's where things can get a little tricky.
Well, sometimes they're unavoidable, Weather delay is classic, unforeseen site conditions. Even those global supply chain issues everyone's talking about these days.
Those can throw a real wrench in the works.
Yeah, for sure. And then other times, those variations, maybe there were some oversights in the original plans, happens. But the key is, no matter what the reason, you've got to manage those variations fairly.
Because you've got the client's budget on the one hand, and then the contractor needs to cover their costs too.
It's a balancing act, and that's why clear communication is absolutely essential. Meticulous documentation too. Like every single variation needs to be recorded, agreed upon, costs, timelines, the whole shebang.
No room for misunderstanding.
None whatsoever, and that's where those progress claims and certificates come in handy. They keep everything transparent.
So everyone knows where they stand, financially speaking.
Exactly. So we've got our systems in place. We're communicating like champs. But we still have to address the elephant in the room, don't we?
Oh, you mean the D word?
The one and only. Disputes. Even with the best planning, sometimes. Well,
Things go sideways.
it happens. Construction projects, they're complex. Lots of moving parts, different personalities.
And sometimes those personalities clash.
It's true, but it's how you handle those disagreements that really matters.
So what's the best approach?
Well, our sources talked about 3 main paths. There's mediation, that's often the first step.
What's mediation like?
It's less formal, more about finding common ground. You've got a neutral facilitator there to guide the conversation.
Like a referee.
In a way, yes. And even if mediation doesn't magically solve everything, it can de-escalate things, get people talking again.
Hitting the pause button and trying to find a win-win. I like it.
Yeah.
But what if that doesn't work? Or the issues are just too complex for mediation?
That's when you might consider arbitration.
Arbitration. That's what, like going to court?
It's a step up from mediation, formality-wise. You've got a neutral arbitrator who hears both sides and then makes a decision.
So it's binding.
It is, yeah. But it's still usually faster and less expensive than going through the whole court system.
And I imagine with construction disputes, you often want an arbitrator who really knows the industry.
Oh, absolutely. Someone who understands all the ins and outs. But, of course, there are times when even arbitration isn't enough.
And you end up in court anyway.
It's the nuclear option, but sometimes it's unavoidable. And that, my friend, is where all that meticulous documentation we were talking about earlier
Becomes absolutely crucial.
a lifesaver, those site diaries, meeting minutes.
If it wasn't written down, it didn't happen.
Exactly. And this is where those expert witnesses come in, too.
Ah, yes. The people who can explain all the technical stuff to us non-construction folks.
Exactly. They help the court understand the nitty-gritty details of the case.
So much to think about.
Eh.
It's amazing how much goes into keeping a construction project on track. Even when, well, life happens.
That it does. But there's one more concept I think we should touch on before we move on.
Okay, I'm all ears. Hit me with it.
Probity.
Probity.
Probity. It's a big one.
Sounds important, but I'm not sure I know what it means.
Basically, it boils down to ethical and transparent conduct, doing things by the book, being accountable.
So it's like a code of conduct for everyone involved in the project.
You could say that, and while it might seem like just another thing to worry about, another hoop to jump through,
Right. More paperwork.
well, embracing probity from the get-go, it can actually prevent a lot of those disputes from happening in the first place.
And it builds trust, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When everyone's playing by the same rules and being open about what they're doing.
It creates a level playing field.
Precisely. And you know what else has really struck me during this deep dive?
With that.
It's incredible how much of this all boils down to communication.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
We've talked about contracts and permits and all these technical things.
All essential, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
But that human element, that focus on clear communication, collaboration, trust, that feels like the real secret sauce to a successful construction project.
Couldn't agree more. And we're going to dig into that even further when we come back after the break, so don't go anywhere.
We're back for the final stretch of this deep dive. And you know, it's funny, we've covered so much ground, all these technicalities.
Feasibility studies, contracts, permits, the whole 9 yards.
It's a lot. But you know what really keeps coming back to me? It's the human side of things.
Oh, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, construction is a people business.
It is. You can have the most amazing design, a watertight budget,
State-of-the-art material.
the works. But if that team isn't clicking, if the communication's not there,
You're in for a world of trouble.
exactly. Because even with the best contract in the world, things can still go south if people aren't on the same page.
Oh, 100%. Think about it. You've got architects, engineers, contractors, subcontractors, suppliers.
Clients, for goodness sake, don't forget the clients.
So many stakeholders, all with their own expertise, their own priorities, their own deadlines.
It's like a giant juggling act.
It is. And communication.
Yeah.
That's how you keep all those balls in the air.
I like that analogy. So how do we become master jugglers then? What are the secrets to keeping that communication flowing?
Well, I'd say it starts with creating a culture of openness right from the get-go.
Okay, so everyone feels comfortable speaking up.
Exactly. And that means having multiple avenues for feedback. It's not just formal meetings and emails.
Oh, for sure. Sometimes you just need to pick up the phone and hash something out quickly.
Exactly. Or have a quick chat on site. Those informal check-ins, they can be invaluable for catching those little misunderstandings before they snowball.
Because sometimes an email just won't cut it, right?
Sometimes. And remember, communication is a two-way street. It's not just about talking, it's about truly listening as well.
Oh, that's so important. Really hearing what the other person is saying, even if you don't agree with it.
Exactly. And that's especially important when things get tough. Because, let's be real, construction projects,
Stressful.
a little bit.
Yeah.
Deadlines, budgets, unexpected problems, these things can put a strain on even the strongest relationships.
For sure. And that's where trust comes in, right?
Big time.
Right.
When you trust your team, when you know everyone has the project's best interests at heart,
You can weather those storms a lot easier.
100%. It's about having each other's backs, even when things get a bit, well,
Concrete.
exactly, concrete. But how do we build that trust?
That's the million-dollar question. It's not just about saying, trust me, is it?
No, it's definitely earned, not given. And one of the best ways to earn it is through transparency.
So being upfront about those challenges, even when it's uncomfortable.
It's not always easy, but it's the right thing to do. Because sweeping problems under the rug, that always comes back to bite you.
Oh, it always does. And on the flip side, when things are going well,
Celebrate those victories, big or small.
exactly. Acknowledge those wins, give credit where credit's due.
It makes such a difference. It builds morale, strengthens those bonds.
Creates that sense of we're all in this together.
Teamwork.
Exactly. And something else has really struck me during this deep dive.
What's-
Even with the best communication in the world, even with a super tight-knit team,
Conflicts are still going to happen.
they're inevitable, aren't they? Especially with projects this complex.
It's bound to happen, but it's not about avoiding conflict altogether.
It's about how you deal with it, right?
100%. Do you let it escalate into a big blow-up?
Or do you address it head-on, constructively?
Exactly. So what's the best approach? Well, encourage that direct, respectful communication always.
No passive-aggressive emails.
Definitely not. And here's the key. Focus on finding solutions. Don't get bogged down in blame games.
Remember, it's not you versus me.
It's we. We're
Yeah.
all in this together, remember. We need to find a path forward that works for the project as a whole.
Love that. So what have we learned today? Construction projects. They're complicated.
That's an understatement.
They are. There are contracts and regulations and technical drawings. It can feel overwhelming.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
But at its core, construction is about people.
It's about turning a shared vision into reality.
Exactly. And that takes communication, collaboration. It takes trust. And it takes a whole lot of hard work.
And a little bit of luck never hurts.
True. But if you can get those key ingredients right, those human elements,
You're well on your way to a successful project.
I love it. Well, that is such a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the world of construction projects.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, remember, it's not just about what you build, it's about how you build it. Keep those communication channels open, foster those relationships, and never underestimate the power of a shared vision. Until next time, happy building.